Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of Tidal Flooding Talk, brought to you by the New Jersey Coastal Coalition and our partners at Tri-X 57 News, who are making this all possible. We are here on another April Tuesday. It was cold early in the month. We're starting to really warm it up here as we go into April. The pollen's certainly here, so it feels like spring. And with us today, we have someone who likes spring and maybe more importantly, summer, as he's a surfer himself. We're talking with David Werner. He is a science teacher at Mates High School. That is over in Manahawkin, educating students all around Ocean County. He's also an adjunct professor at Stockton University, knows a lot about the shore, teaches a lot about the shore, and we're happy to have him on today. David, thanks for coming on Tidal Flooding Talk as we chat on this Tuesday.
Yeah, thanks, Joe, for having me and the whole gang. This is really exciting. I love getting invited to these types of events. It's good conversation. You know, we're in an forever changing environment, and the more people know, the better decisions that can be made, and people can make smart moves.
Totally. And let's kind of start with that. I know, you're fairly young, just like all of us here, but we have had, a number of changes over the past couple of decades, in terms of knowing more information and what we've seen with our weather. As an educator, especially educating people who are more or less in their teens between high school and college, how has that evolved for you and what your messaging is to students from when you started up until now in 2025?
Yeah, I love actually talking about that because, it's all about experience. And as I become an older educator, I can use my previous experience growing up, in LBI and surfing and at the beaches and the shore and the coast. And then even every year of teaching, seeing how much change is happening so quickly. And I tell a lot of stories, and then I tell my students, I'm like, guys, I know I'm dating myself a little here, but back in the day, we used to be surfing like where you're standing, and now it's a 22-foot dune. So there's a lot of stories like that because it's completely different than when I grew up on the island and along the coast. So everything has just changed so much, and there's so much to talk about. I like to use a lot of websites, a lot of historic aerial photos to kind of show that change as well, which definitely sends a good message, and it's able to physically see those changes over time.
Now, do you feel like when you're teaching that coastal flooding is an important topic that you bring up, especially with, the high school students, and then as a professor at Stockton, or even when you're teaching about surfing? Is flooding a big topic for you?
Absolutely. I feel like because it's becoming more prevalent and we're seeing sunny day flooding now, even on LBI, where you have a perfectly beautiful day, the storm is well offshore, you get a little increased wave height, a little higher tide than normal, and you have water in the streets. So it's definitely a great, conversation to have. And especially my students, and I have seniors now at Mates that are driving, and I say, don't drive through the floodwaters, or don't drive fast through the floodwaters, because there's high levels of salinity, and I think that's something that people don't understand. My daughter is a senior at Mates, her freshman and sophomore year. I helped her out, driving her all over the island during these storms in the winter to collect salinity samples on all the flood zones of LBI, and she was testing salinity. And it was incredible to find all sorts of salinity values, everything from 0 to 30 parts per thousand, which, for those that don't know salinity, 30 parts per thousand is roughly the salinity of the ocean. So if you're driving through that water, at high speeds, which we see a lot of people do, it can actually destroy your engine of your car, your brakes. So it's definitely fun to teach the students about those particular issues as they start driving as well.
Dave, do you think that the Coastal Coalition, one of our principles is trying to educate the youth? Adults are pretty aware. Sometimes, kids, teenagers, young adults have a lot going on. They may or may not be aware of their surroundings with everything going on in their lives and changing in their lives. Do you think they have a pretty good foundation going in, or is coastal flooding and our changing climate something that's kind of foreign to them? And how receptive are they to your teachings on the topics?
Yeah, I actually, most of them are clueless, to tell you the truth. They don't understand, they don't know the concepts, especially a lot of Stockton students that come in and take my classes, they don't know much about the coastline, the beach, as simple as a sea breeze to coastal flooding, and they learn a lot. But I feel like the only ones that really have that experience are the ones who live in that environment, who live in Bayhead, who are, who live in Beach Haven, who have to experience those floodwaters and be educated in order to navigate those roads during storm events. But everyone else inland tends to not really deal with it. They're not going over during storms. They're not experiencing that. So I think it's definitely those, the majority of them don't have a foundation in terms of understanding coastal flooding overall.
I don't know if this is a question or a statement. I didn't fully play this through my mind yet, but I'm wondering, you're in Ocean County, you're teaching in Ocean County, right? So you do have students who live 20 miles away from the ocean. Like, where's like that line, I guess. So here's the question. Where's like that line where students, like, they know about it and then somewhere it's just a completely foreign concept? I grew up in Union, New Jersey. There was no ocean bias. I had no idea about coastal flooding and the difference between freshwater flooding and saltwater flooding growing up.
I don't know, like in terms of mileage. I mean, I think those that live along the bay side and kind of closer to the bay, like you live in Brick, you live near the Matitaconk, you live near the Toms River. I think those students have a little bit more of a foundation, a little more knowledge base of that environment, especially if they like to fish or surf or go boating. Those are the ones that tend to have that knowledge. But there are a whole group of students that even some that don't even that live in that environment that still don't know it or never just cared to learn it. And then there's those that live further away that say, wow, I don't need to know this, or it's not even something that's in their general, daily lives. So they kind of don't get that information. So that's why I feel like the education piece is so important. And I have students leave my classes, even at Stockton, that are like, this is awesome. I understand where I live now. I understand the beaches, the tides, the currents, and it gives them a good foundation of navigating the coastline.
It's a good plug too for our web app 4.0 that we have at the Coastal Coalition, where you sign up for free. You have to be in a member town, and we are growing a number of towns. None in Ocean County yet, unfortunately. But when we get there, and we are, you'll be able to sign up, and for free, you're going to get these automated alerts that not only tell you it's going to flood, but where to move your car. Right? If you live on a beach block and your car is getting flooded, like you said, that salinity that could be as salty as the Atlantic Ocean is going to corrode your car, if not push it away. It only takes 6 inches of water to start moving a car, and really once you get to a foot, it's going to move, even SUVs and stuff like that. So, little plug for us at the Coastal Coalition, the web app 4.0. You go to our website, njcoastalcoalition.com, and you can see more about it. We're going to get into our first break here. On the other end, we're going to talk more with David Werner, and thanks for listening, everybody, so far to Tidal Flooding. Thanks to the New Jersey Coastal Coalition, your flood insurance bills are lower and your streets safer from the reality of flooding. Since beginning in 2013, we build more resilient shoreline communities. Our member towns develop and share in best practices that anticipate future concerns and create flooding solutions. From our town-specific free web app for flooding information to our weekly Tidal Flooding Talk show, we focus on flooding 24/7. Visit www.njcoastalcoalition.com for more.
Hello, welcome back. You're watching Tidal Flooding Talk. We're with Dave Werner, our special guest tonight. And for this segment of the show, we're going to really be focusing on surfing, because he is also a surf instructor, and we want to talk about how that is connected with our show, Tidal Flooding Talk. So Dave, my first question to you is, what do you find to be the greatest challenge with educating your surfers about, the risk of flooding and also the ocean safety, really, in terms of these tides and coastal storms?
That's a great question. What's happened in LBI specifically, and a lot of our coastal towns, is through beach nourishment projects. It has altered our sandbars and our beach landscape so dramatically that the currents are much different. We get a lot of rip currents now because the movement of sand that's been done. It is kind of one of those necessary evils to protect us during storms. So we have this big giant 22-foot dune constructed by the Army Corps of Engineers. But it has altered because we've covered up our jetties, which are actually groins, but we call them jetties. we've covered them up, and they would help break up some of that longshore drift, which is the current that pulls you up or down the beach when it's really windy and there's a lot of wave energy. So it's a great, it's hard to get the students to understand that, because they look at the water like, oh, this is great, and then they get in and the current's pulling, or they're getting caught in a rip, or we're on the board and I'm helping someone catch waves and someone else gets caught in a rip and I have to, paddle over to them to help them. So it has changed our beach dynamics quite a bit. But I love teaching the kids all about, and I mean kids, adults, everyone that comes to learn how to surf, all about, like, the tides, the currents, the waves, because it's all part of it. I mean, ocean safety, I mean, there's people that drown in the ocean every year, even locally, and it could be avoided, with just a little bit of education. The first thing I ask is, do you know what a rip current is? And a majority of people say no. And then you're like, okay, like, you should know what this is and know what to do if you get caught, because if you don't, it could be a really bad situation.
And with the rip currents, how do you're in a rip current, what do you do?
So basically, what I tell my students is just relax, don't fight it, swim to the side, swim sideways, parallel to the beach, and then just kind of don't panic. Lay on your back, make sure you wave your arms a little bit, let someone know you're not in control. Typically, what I tell them is the most obvious thing to do first is to try to panic and swim straight in. And I said, that's where people get into trouble. So even I even like to educate them, if you see someone in a rip current, make sure you have something to float on, because typically people are panicking, kids, adults alike, and they'll actually use you as a flotation device and pull you underwater to try to stay above water. And that could be really bad. So just relax, don't fight it, go to this, swim parallel to the beach, let the current, do its thing in some ways, and then swim back to the beach once you're out of it. Because they're not big. I mean, they could be anywhere from 20 feet to 100 feet wide, but sometimes they're on the smaller side.
And through
the opposite of what your instinct might tell you to do is what you have to do, right? Because obviously that's very scary. So you naturally will panic, but you got to fight that urge, I guess.
Yep.
As of mid-April, this is according to the National Weather Service, unfortunately, 14 people have died within the United States so far this year, due to whether it's rip currents or sneaker waves, which are another kind of hazard as well. And they range in ages. I'm just looking here from age 8 that we had in California on January 19th up to someone in their 70s, and also in California on March 25th. So it really doesn't matter how old you are, and there's plenty of people in their 30s and 40s here. It doesn't matter what age you are. You're not winning against water. Many times you're not winning against water.
Yeah, and a lot of times it happens during the summer when we get our hurricane swells, because the storm is way offshore. It's beautiful conditions, and you get these really kind of powerful waves that people don't expect. And there's a lot of strong current with it. And sure enough, you get these sets of waves, and then it'll go calm for several minutes because it's such a long wave period. And then you'll get a set of waves come in, and then people get caught and don't realize the energy from that long period swell of the hurricane can definitely, be a lot more intimidating. And you can't tell until you really go in most of the time. So the hurricane swells are when people get into a lot of trouble, because it does, rips pop up real quick, and then also the really strong energy from that.
Dave, do you find that do rip currents fluctuate every year? Does it depend on tropical activity? You have beach replenishments and coastal erosion, and that can change sandbars. The shape of the Jersey Shore, you as a surfer probably know more than anyone. It was constantly changing. So are rip currents kind of like depends on the year? Is it a steady increase over the years in terms of the numbers of them you are observing?
Yeah, a lot of it, it's random a lot of times, but we notice right after replenishment projects, the rip currents tend to be more frequent. And that's when there's a lot of sand shifting around trying to replace itself. Because again, we're talking about a barrier island. It's a pile of sand that's meant to migrate, and we're keeping it in place. And that's the goal of beach nourishment projects. And sure enough, that also opens up. And then with the jetties being covered up, we get a lot of movement of water and sand. So every day those could shift. I know, like up in Ship Bottom, where I have my, Werner Surf School, I'm teaching private lessons, and, there's one rip typically in Ship Bottom that's there almost every year. and it could be a big one. And you see the lifeguards, they notice it, they set up on the other sides of it. But you have to be aware, because when there's a bit of a current, you can get sucked down into it and then be pulled out. So, but yeah, it's not really super predictable. You just have to be aware of what the sandbars are. And the lifeguards do an amazing job. They look at the water, they can see the sandbar set up, and they know exactly where to put that swimming section so that the swimmers aren't in danger.
Awesome.
Now,
Yeah.
we've talked. Oh, I'm sorry, Joe.
No, that's all right. Go, Palm. Go.
We've talked on previous episodes of the show how, a lot of people going to the beach, and I'm guilty of it myself. There's, a dozen signs that you pass of warnings, what to look out for. Do you feel like there's a way that we can improve getting that information out to people so that they actually receive it rather than just walking right by these signs?
That's a great question. It's almost the same as asking, do people understand the salinity levels of coastal flooding? And, I think just education, we have to find ways to reach out to them. It could be, social media, could be different ways to even just billboards coming over to the island, like, do you know what a rip current is? That could be super helpful because people are passing that coming over to the beach. I don't know if there's a way to reach everyone. I think, definitely signs help and that type of approach. But unfortunately, unless you really kind of plug it through some sort of source or social media, then it's going to be hard to reach everyone.
I have to ask, and this is a little bit of a selfish question, but I saw you went surfing in Ireland last year on your Instagram handle. That's at Professor Fishhead. I'm going to Ireland in July, and I was told that you could surf in Ireland. I would just want to know, how thick of a wetsuit did you have to go to surf in Ireland? Because I think you were there in April, if what Instagram's telling me is correct.
Yeah, we were there over Easter break, and it was incredible. It was more of a family trip, and I was like, let's pack wetsuits so we can rent a board and at least get one session in Ireland. It's like a bucket list thing, and there's so many waves in Ireland. It's very windy, very rugged, very very stormy a lot of times. But we had about four. We bought our 4.3 millimeter wetsuits, which is, we wear 5 mils here in the winter, so it's a step down from that. The water was about probably 48, 50 degrees. But it was a really great experience. There's a lot of great shops over there. They really do accommodate if you want to go surf. There's great spots to hit up. I can give you some more info on that if you're interested. But it's a beautiful island, man. I'm telling you, it was incredible. I want to go back and do an actual surf trip there because there's so many great spots that get phenomenal waves. But you just got to put your time in. And again, it's not easy to get good waves because the amount of wind and storm energy.
Got it. Okay.
I'll definitely be telling my husband to watch this episode, because then maybe I'll be going to Ireland in the near future if there's good surf.
Oh, the castles and the scenery. I mean, I can't say enough about it. It's an amazing trip, and I wish we had time to go to Scotland as well while we were over there. But it's definitely one of those trips. And then in next week we're going to Paris for Easter break, and we're going to try to make it to the coast if I can, see Biarritz, and there's some great surf spots over there. It's like a family trip, but if we can get over to get in the water over there would be a bonus. So
awesome. All right, well, we're going to take a brief break. We'll come right back again with Dave Werner. You are listening to Tidal Flooding Talk.
welcome back to Tidal Flooding Talk on this Tuesday. We are mid-discussion, talked about surfing, talked about flooding, education. Dave, I wanted to go back to something where, as a meteorologist, I've learned so much from surfers. Surfers and fishermen have taught me so much, because they watch the weather, they watch the water, they watch the waves, the sand all the time. I wanted to ask you a two-part question. Number one, what's the as far as changes you've observed along the Jersey Shore, like on a recent basis, like on a year-to-year basis, what type of changes do you see? And then over decades, what are the biggest changes you've seen on LBI and on the Ocean County shoreline?
Yeah, that's a loaded two-part question, but I'll do my best to answer it. So year to year, because of our beach nourishment projects, we're seeing a lot of movement of sand, shifting sands, sandbars come and go. The surf is not like it was, 20 years ago. We had our jetties. Harvey Cedars was the premier spot, especially growing up and learning there. So it was extremely different. I find it very hard. Even my daughters, like teaching them how to surf and progress at surfing in Long Beach Island, because we don't have those structures anymore. We don't have the hardened structure that again gives us a little bit of relief, helps us to find a spot to paddle out. You go up to Spring Lake, those areas, they have their jetties and it's the sandbars set up a bit different. So it makes it a little bit harder for that because the waves tend to break faster. They tend to break more powerful. We get a lot of really dynamic conditions, which makes it challenging for a beginner. You're asking a 12-year-old to paddle out on a 4 to 5 foot day and it's detonating on the sandbar can be really tough. So you ask any surfer and you'll tell them it's not like how it used to be, back in the day. It's like I said earlier, it's kind of one of those things. If we don't do it, we'll end up like the Outer Banks and we'll be losing homes and then we won't have our barrier island to enjoy. So it's like it's a tough situation to be in.
Now, have you found that any other technology has improved, or maybe that you recommend to your students, whether it's your high school students or your college students or even your surfers? Are there any like resources that you recommend to them to look for when they do go, whether it's surfing or otherwise?
Yeah, obviously know your limits. That's a big one. Like if you're not comfortable on a certain day or it's a little bit too big or the water temp's a little cold, you're not prepared, just be careful because it's tricky. I mean, you can get in a really bad situation. Never surf alone because there could be the chance where especially we get some of our sandbars are so shallow, you could fall head first, hit your head, you could get hit by your board. We get injured a lot surfing. I've broken bones, gotten cut multiple times. It could be really scary. And I used to surf alone when I was, my younger days, but now I just kind of like go, is this worth it? And usually there's enough people around. Surfing has grown tremendously. I've been surfing for Jetty for 20 years now and growing with that company in Long Beach Island and locally. And the amount of surfers and how big it's gotten is incredible. It's such an amazing sport to be part of. And then obviously with the connection to the environment, right? We're coastal stewards. Like we want the environment to be healthy. We want to clean the beaches. We want to make sure that we have this to enjoy. So yeah, we're also very passionate about the environment.
Now, has that like you were talking about surfing in other locations, are any two coasts the same? So when you're teaching your students, do you tell them, this is how it is everywhere, or do you give them any other, insight to that?
Yeah, I mean, I always say travel, go to different places because New Jersey, we're very, we have a very linear coastline, sandy beaches, barrier island setups. When you go, even just take a drive to Rhode Island or Maine or in those areas and experience it because you have this cliff and bluff system and all this different change in coastline. So it's anywhere you go, it's amazing. That's why I love traveling. It's just going to experience that and seeing how the waves behave differently along those coastlines. Because again, for us, we have a lot of waves that are very, very fast. We'll get a couple seconds, we're up and surfing. I mean, you can go to you can go up to Point Judith in Rhode Island and you can surf a right-hand point break, and you could surf a wave for 2 minutes on a good day. So it's a different experience. So that's a great question.
David, we're gonna wrap. Oh, go ahead, Dan.
Oh, you
I'll
just mentioned Point Judith, a small world. I grew up in Rhode Island and spent so many so many summers in Narragansett on the Point Judith beach. And yeah, that was kind of my first introduction to surfing. Not that I'm a huge surfer, but watch the surfers, learn some stuff from them. And it is much different than the Jersey Shore, absolutely.
Yeah, my coldest session ever was in 2004. We went up, me and my buddy Brian Cohen went up to Rhode Island for a big nor'easter swell, and the water was about 29 degrees,
Wow.
ice chunks in the water, and it was so cold.
That's when you put the hood on and that. What's that stuff you put on your face for the?
Put some Vaseline on your face.
Yeah, is it just Vaseline?
Cover up.
Okay. Yeah. Awesome. Well, David, hey, listen, we really appreciate you coming on. This was cool. We talked about education, talked about surfing. It was all good here. Before we wrap up, we do this every week. What is the one thing you can't stop talking about, tidal flooding or otherwise?
Whew, that's a good one. I mean, I'm always talking about the coastline and changes. I think lately I've been talking a lot about just this upcoming season fishing, getting the boat ready and just trying to prepare for that, because we had such a great run of bluefin tuna that came through our coastal waters, even pretty close in the fall and the summer and the fall. So we're looking at, that anxious moments of waiting for this weather to break and then finally getting out and, getting out on the water.
Awesome. All right, good stuff. Palma, you're next.
Okay, well, flooding wise, we're approaching seasonal rental season, and I work in the construction office, Dave. I don't know if I filled you in on that, but we also get a lot of people renting out their homes in the summer, and so we really want to try to educate those people about what it is like visiting our beautiful coastline here and what they should be prepared for as well. And not flooding related, we got the end of the hockey season coming up, and Flyers did not make the playoffs, but I have hope for next year. I think they're going to do great.
Are you a Bruins fan, Dan?
I am. I'm a fair weather fan, so Sox and Pats all the way. Bruins, Celtics. I watch the playoffs if they're in the playoffs. But yeah.
Okay. Gotcha. Okay. Is that your one thing you're talking
No, my
about?
one thing,
the Bruins?
usually the thing I can't stop talking about is weather. We're in a bad stretch, at least the first half of April, where the weekends have been lousy. I got so much yard work to do. I'm just putting in a plug. We're gonna fix this bad weekend stretch as we hit the big spring and summer season. Hopefully, right the ship.
You know what? You're making me think, Dan. I'll go with this. So I do a shore summer weekend weather report card. I know it's a mouthful, but it's our 8th year of doing it, and I'm hoping that we get really good grades this summer. Last year was good. We had a 3.3 GPA the way I graded out the summer weekend. So we're going to hope we flip this pattern, like you said, Dan, the other way around, and our Saturdays and Sundays, and we count Fridays, summer Fridays on the report card are good.
And
right.
No upwelling this summer, please.
Oh yeah, well we could do a whole nother episode on that. We had immense amount of upwelling last year, and that kept the coast cold, as you know, David.
I suffered. Werner Surf School was hurting last summer because we had so much cold. I wasn't going in. I'm like, I'm not bringing kids in. No way.
Yeah.
It was crazy.
Yeah, I know. It wasn't good there. All right. Well, David, thank you again so much for being on. We really appreciate it. You can check him out on Instagram, Werner Surf School, right? On Instagram. That's where you can find you. Yep. And we'll be back next Tuesday with a new episode of Tidal Flooding Talk, brought to you by the New Jersey Coastal Coalition, powered by Tri-X 57.